Is Dr. Manny? Wow, this is my 100th broadcast. Thank you, Facebook. So, the topic today, well, welcome to Asylum. Where are my manners? The topic today is triggers. We're all familiar with the folk and the current cultural definition of explanation of triggers. People are like, oh, that's triggering. I've been triggered. But how do you turn triggers into something empowering, something you can do something about, a piece of information that puts you in a position of making better distinctions, better decisions, and better actions, and choosing better actions? So the way to do it is to begin by recognizing when you've been triggered and what that looks like. Because usually we don't catch when we've been triggered until we've finished enough of the script in sort of a trance, in a hypnotic daze, that we can realize that we also are starting to feel a sense of regret for our actions. Whether it's because we're noticing some more remorseful emotions, whether we're feeling guilt, whether we start to compare where we want to, what we've just done, to where we really want to go in the bigger picture, and we feel a sense of shame because possibly we notice that we're doing the same thing again and holding ourselves back. We're tripping ourselves up. We're using up resources that should have gone towards the longer, more meaningful, higher self journey. Possibly we've fallen victim to momentary distraction, temptation, or buckled under the pressure of threat, of fear. We've done the fear response. So basically, a trigger, as you probably know, is something that happens in the environment that causes you to have this rupture of memories from the past come rushing in. And usually, when we're talking about triggers, we're talking about something traumatic from our past where we disconnected then when we were actually recording and experiencing it for the first time. And what we did is we have encoded a memory that doesn't have a story with it, but it has a set of body experiences. So the reason for this is that usually during a traumatic event, you disconnect. You almost see the story as if it were happening to someone else, as a way of making the pain of the moment less visceral. So those recorded memories remain in your unconscious, and when enough of the cues from those events show up in your environment, when something reminds you of that trauma, you're triggered into those memories. And the trauma can be so subtle. It could be something like a public humiliation. It could be a fall. It could be something that you weren't able to learn when other people learn. It can be a breakup. It can be traditionally trauma is associated with war and sexual assault. And those are very important as well, because a lot of the triggering that happens in our culture happens at a level that is subconscious to someone who hasn't been through those type of things, but very visceral and painful and debilitating to someone who has. It's microaggressions and subconscious primes, cues, and reminders for people who have had a certain traumatic event that they identify with to stay in their place, essentially. It's how the cultural narrative keeps you constrained and small and limited, either by disease diagnosis, gender, race, social class, or current position, or by a job role. So all those things make us susceptible to triggers. Triggers exist at the edge of your identity, sort of the edge of your consciousness, the place where you personally stopped advancing in your story. Because a lot of things that are in trigger areas for a lot of people are in common sense areas for others. Others wonder why you can't just do the thing, why you can't just, for example, some of us might be still triggered by darkness if we had a traumatic event around darkness, where we do bright lights as adults. And other people will be like, well, why don't you just turn the light off? You know, logically nothing will happen. And it's kind of triggering because you get defensive about the fact that you even have to discuss it. Triggers often happen around areas where the values that you represent in that space might have been imposed on you at an earlier age when you didn't really have the wherewithal to lay out the defenses of your own psychic boundaries. So sometimes when someone tries to discuss or question you about something where you don't have a nice, well thought out set of socially acceptable responses around it, you get uncomfortable, and that awkwardness, that possible guilt and shame around that set of behaviors sends you into scripted behaviors, like these sets of behaviors that are rigid. They're either really rigid and not really susceptible to feedback, and you don't have what are called affordances, the hooks, the places where everyone else sees a decision, you see a threat. Other people, and to the best example of this would be that you'd be familiar, that most people are familiar with, is when you look at a person who can be triggered into drinking as opposed to entering drinking in an intentional, volitional way. That person, once they've had that first drink, because they went into the first drink with looking for the payoff of relief, and they just are trying to escape the state that they were in before the drink, you'll notice that there's an anxiety around the drink, and then there's an anxiety around a second, third, or fourth drink, because they're essentially chasing this state of mind that's away from the state of mind that the trigger knocked them into, if that makes sense. So, how do you recover from a trigger once you've recognized that you're in a trigger, that you've triggered into scripted behavior? You return all your attention. Hey, Dana, how's it going? Thanks for dropping by. So, in order to return to the present, there's one of two things you can do. One is to focus all your attention on your breathing. Now, traditionally, the way that's taught is just focus on the breath and notice the way your abdomen rises and sinks as you breathe in and out. And some people find it helpful to put their hands on their abdomen during this process, so that they can, if you're not really getting a clear signal from the inside of feeling your abdomen expand and contract, and if you want to have your eyes closed during the process, so as to kind of bring yourself back in and shut out the outside stimuli, then with your eyes closed, sometimes you can put your hand on your belly and turn all your attention towards the sensation of your hands rising. Now, it sounds like the open eyes, closed eyes thing sounds like a minor thing, but a lot of times we have visual triggers, like there might be something in the room that is triggering you into overwhelm. There might be some aspect of something someone is wearing, a sign. Sometimes in a movie, there's a particular scene, and every time there's a room in that scene, it triggers something within you that just is overwhelming, from even the pleasant experience or even the horror experience that the movie intended for you to have, if that makes sense. Sometimes a movie is geared towards the mainstream, and even then is trying to trigger them a good bit. But people who have been through some deeper traumas, the volume on those triggers is louder, and the recovery, because of the cascade of emotions you can fall into, the recovery is longer. So I digress a bit, but the point is that those are the times when you want to shut out some stimuli. Maybe you like earplugs. I like 33 decibel earplugs, because then I can tune into my breathing, and the breathing is really resonant throughout my whole mind. It eliminates outside noises that might pull my attention away from the breathing. Now, another thing you can do is you can add layers of thought, because the goal is to get out of that negative emotional mind. You're trying to pull away from what's called an amygdala hijack. The amygdala, the part of your brain that does like fear and intense emotions, is ringing. So you're trying to pull stuff out of your prefrontal cortex, your higher mind. You're trying to pull stories out, but not stories that are going to trigger you into a loop of rumination, not stories that make you feel stuck. Okay? So we discussed you want to look at the breathing. And what happens is when you're triggered, it's so hard to return to the breathing, because you feel as if the story that's running in your head is right there in front of you as an immediate threat. Even if it's just you just got off the phone with someone who triggered you, hang up the phone, and you just feel the need to immediately go tear their face off, hop in the car or whatever. when you can pause, and within the breathing, you can de-escalate yourself so that if that is indeed the situation, it still is around. It's not going to disappear just because you don't go right to it and do the cascaded triggering scripts. But when you're triggered, it just feels like everything needs to be done now. That person needs to be told off now. That door needs to be slammed now. That curse word set needs to be said now. These are all just dark, dark scripts. Again, and then as I mentioned, slamming that drink now, go smoke that cigarette now, or whatever it is. Displace aggression onto that lower level employee immediately. It's just all those things, the compulsive feeling, the unmeasured feeling of it. That's what tells you you're in a triggered state. The fact that it's like you're inside your body watching this cascade of self-sabotaging events unfold, and you can't pull up the willingness to pull yourself off of that. That's when you gotta just return to the breathing until you're able to actually focus your energy on the breathing and then make a choice about whatever it is that is pulling you off by voluntarily returning your mind to that thought after you've de-escalated and reset. You're still going to be running in triggered mode. As long as, if you find yourself coming up with clever comebacks for someone that are very ego and identity based, that'll put them in their place, that'll show them who they're messing with or whatever. All those are scripted trigger behavior. So once you're able to pull yourself back into the breathing, that essentially clears your palate. It just makes it that from there you can choose a thought, a better thought, a thought more in alignment with your higher outcomes that you want in the long term, bigger picture stuff. So that's basically by pulling inwards and not raging and not attacking yourself, not getting angry at yourself, none of those stories, by shutting all those down. From there, that energy can now be harnessed first to think about what are the things that you value most. Activate a vision of your future and how you want that to look. And pour so much energy into that it becomes vivid, and that you're able to fall into it, and that your emotional state is an emotional state of inspiration towards that vision and the values that vision embodies, and choose actions from within that goal set. Those are intentional actions. Intentional actions are actions that form a chain in your mind, step after step. And they don't have to be super specific, but they have to be specific enough for you to act on. Step into one of those action steps. Hey, Alan, thanks for dropping by. So by stepping into one of those intentional spaces, what you've done is you've sublimated the energy of being triggered by the environment, a violation of your expectations or whatever. You're taking the momentum of that emotional energy, and instead of causing it to trigger you into a highly aroused, negative, destructive, reactive story, you're channeling that energy first by returning to the present, second by retrieving from your memory stories that activate mental, like the feelings of being in a place of something that you value in the future. It takes the time distance out of your gratification by allowing you to have a sample of the pleasure and gratitude and fulfillment that's waiting for you in the future now, through the achievement of switching from that triggered behavior into a more empowering, choice-based, value-aligned behavior. So then you reward yourself in two ways. Internally, this is how you build an internal locus of control, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of basically value-driven decision-making. So internally, you're going to get, first, as you pull the anticipation up, and that triggers the want. That triggers the dopamine cascade. You want, and you only want things that you kind of think you're going to be able to get. If you're defeated before you even head out on it, which is what will happen when you have that angry feeling if you don't return to the breathing and cleanse your palate, you get that guilt-driven drive. And when you have that kind of pursuit, you beat yourself up through the whole pursuit process. So that's why when you're triggered, you want to return to that baseline, that breathing, that state of clean palate. And then from there, you want to retrieve your values, because then you're not retrieving stuff to prove people wrong or to show off or to defend your identity. You're retrieving the deeper, longer term, more meaningful goals, and you're pulling those into your consciousness, and you're having them activate the values and bring to the foreground of your mind the values that help you to make choices that propel you into action, and that action will free you from the being stuck at the point where you're going down the cascade of the triggered emotions. But again, the first step is to return to the breathing. So those are the concepts around triggers. I appreciate you joining me in Asylum. It's Dr. Manning. I'm out.